Hey, it's Terry, and this is the Something Spooky review of Zombieland Double Tap, which was released in 2019 by Columbia. It was directed by Ruben Fleischer, who directed the first one. It also had the writers from the original film, and of course the cast that all returned. Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Emma Stone, and Abigail Breslin are all back. So it is very much that same first crew, and I love the first Zombieland. I think most people do. It's kind of a classic now. It's been 10 years. It's been 10 years in between these two movies. The first Zombieland released in 2009, so it's definitely kind of loomed over this last decade. It was a pretty important horror comedy film, and it's taken a long time to get here to the sequel. So there's a lot of funny references to that too, that zombie culture has kind of continued and progressed this whole time, which makes Double Tap, an interesting proposition to kind of come back to this world after so much has happened with zombies, including like The Walking Dead, starting the year after the original movie. Like that wasn't even out at the time of the original movie. So there are some funny references to that and about how like they're kind of still around and still doing zombie stuff, even there's so much zombie stuff. That's one of the things I like about the movie, is it's not afraid to break the fourth wall, and it has that same kind of self-referential humor that the first one did. However, on the bad side of that, it has been a decade, and it kind of does feel like it. The world feels kind of dated, and it's just inherently kind of strange to come back to these characters, especially with their situation being, what it is. They're in this post-apocalyptic zombie land, last we saw them, and to just kind of pick the story back up after 10 years is just weird, and there's really no way around it. I'm glad, ultimately, I'm going to get into all my thoughts about the movie. I'm glad that they decided to do it. I've read that the cast is who really wanted to make this movie, and I love the cast in this movie. The characters are the best parts of these movies, so I'm happy that they were able to do it. But it is just weird, and it just kind of immediately starts feeling weird when you're like, well, it's, been 10 years, this is where we're picking up with these characters. We've obviously missed a lot. And it just kind of immediately starts getting into some of the problems with the movie, which is that it's very over-the-top gimmicky, even more than the first movie. And it has these kind of big set pieces, and I won't ever go into specifics or spoil anything, but it has these very kind of big, grand locations, and it's basically acts 1, 2, and 3 have these kind of big locations, and everything in the humor and the story is based around those locations. So I will kind of spoil the first one. They're in the White House. I don't think that's much of a spoiler because it's in the trailers and stuff. So it's like that first act where they're in the White House is kind of a good evaluation of the rest of the movie, in that like all of the humor is just like, White House stuff. And it just doesn't feel as like organic as the humor in the first movie, which was spoofing zombie movies. And, it was this kind of road trip feel, which this one does get into. But the humor just feels very kind of like forced and like just not natural. It feels like it's being written. It feels like a script making jokes about these settings. There are other things like the White House, and it just is not very funny, honestly. And that's kind of the biggest problem I have with the movie, is even though I do still like the characters and they're funny because of the performances, the writing is not funny. The performances are funny and the writing is not. So it's like they kind of, on brute force of the actors, are able to make things funny. But if you think about it, without your attachment for those characters or the great performances, it's like that's really not funny at all. And unfortunately, that happens a lot in this movie. In a similar way, it's, like the original Zombieland, but even more so, it has a very kind of blockbuster feel. It's barely a horror movie, and it is because it's zombies and there's some violence, but it's obviously mostly a comedy, and there's a lot of action. I think there's probably more action than the first movie even. So it has this kind of big, grand blockbuster feel, and so it doesn't have any real kind of identity in a, filmic sense. Like, you don't really notice the cinematography. The soundtrack is all like, modern pop music and rock music and stuff. So it just feels like this big, little bit soulless blockbuster. And the problem is it's not very fun. Like if you're going to do something like that, you kind of really have to blow the doors down with what you're doing. And like this one just never really made me enjoy it. I really wanted to. I was kind of bummed out because I was ready to return to this, these characters and this world, and I was really excited that they got the whole original cast back. So I really wanted to like this movie, and I just was not enjoying it. I was pretty much kind of just bored the whole time, which is unfortunate, but it's not really funny. The zombies aren't scary. In kind of typical zombie sequel fashion, they just kind of get into like some cliches where like the zombies are barely even a threat for most of it. They're kind of just around in the background. Then they like try to amp it up by having like more powerful zombies without any specifics, but it's just like stuff that we've seen before, and the zombies just don't feel as consequential as they did in the first movie even. They're kind of just in the background, so it doesn't really deliver on that front. And then for being like this big action blockbuster, it just never really impressed me. So it's just like not really, able to do any of its things particularly well, and it feels just a little like flat. And I say all of this again a little bit regretfully because I did, really want to come back with these characters, and I'm glad that they were able to do it. The cast is great, but ultimately I found Zombieland Double Tap just kind of boring, and there just wasn't really much to enjoy in it. I still love the first movie, and I'm going to watch this again sometime. It's not like it was that bad, but I was just not really able to enjoy it, and it definitely was a disappointment for me. So I'm going to give it a C-. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, please remember to like the video and follow Something Spooky for more. Thanks.